Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
From Afghanistan to Iraq, the American military losses are on the rise, which is contributing to more confusion and setbacks within the American administration, as it has been facing more internal and external criticism. In Afghanistan, 17 American soldiers were killed while on board a military helicopter that was shot down by an anti-aircraft missile. In Iraq, violence and security unrest are also on the rise, where hundreds of Iraqis are dying daily. In addition, American soldiers who are supposedly there as peacekeepers are also being killed daily. 17 American service members were killed as their military aircraft was shot down in eastern Afghanistan. The soldiers were participating in a military operation. They were en route to Asadabad in Kunar province near the Pakistani border, where the American forces are pounding some Taliban hideouts. The soldiers were killed on impact as the helicopter was hit by hostile fire. The incident caused concern that the Taliban is capable of executing military operations. It also caused confusion among the Americans as to whether to deploy aircraft to the scene of the crash due to the anticipation of hostile fire. This was the second military aircraft to crash in the past 2 months in Afghanistan. The death toll of Americans in Afghanistan this year has risen to 29 soldiers. The number of American casualties has been compounded by the losses in Iraq, as the death toll of Americans there has reached 160 soldiers since the forming of the new Iraqi government in April. The Iraqi fighters escalated their attacks, as they are launching an average of 400 to 500 attacks a week. Despite the crackdown and the arrest of thousands of fighters, there was no decline in the number of attacks. More than 10,000 fighters have been arrested in the past year. Such an increase in violence reflects negatively on public surveys, which show a major decline in the support for the war in Iraq. The American administration is deeply worried for such lack of support, especially since some surveys are showing that 6 out of 10 Americans want the U.S. to withdraw from Iraq. The most recent statistics show that 58% of Americans do not agree with Bush's policy in Iraq, whereas 40% of Americans agree with his policy. 61 of Americans believe that Bush lacks a clear plan to fix the situation in Iraq, and more than 50% of the Americans want the U.S. administration to set a timetable for the American military withdrawal from Iraq. Between the number of statistics and the number of soldiers killed, the military situation in the battlefield is getting more complex day after day. There is no clear strategy to train enough Iraqi soldiers and army personnel to replace the American forces, thus paving the way for an American military withdrawal. Moreover, the American strategy, which has been described by the U.S. as a strategy intended to reduce the risks taken by soldiers, is indeed contributing to the growing animosity and hatred between the Iraqis and the American soldiers, where the latter failed to restore the peace in their areas of deployment. All these factors are contributing to the agreement among most Americans that the U.S. President George Bush is headed toward a disaster because of his policy in Iraq. George Bush admitted that there are doubts regarding his strategy in Iraq. However, he defended the war in Iraq and said it is worth the sacrifice.
A preliminary court judge in Rabat decided to postpone the trial of the Islamic female opposition activist Nadia Yassin, who is charged with criticizing the Moroccan monarchy. She is the unofficial spokeswoman of the Justice and Charity Organization and the daughter of Sheikh Abdel Karim, the leader of the same movement. Nadia will be tried for saying that she prefers the republican system over obsolete autocracy, hinting to the country's monarchy.
The court trial of Nadia Yassin, the daughter of the spiritual leader of the banned Justice and Charity Organization, opened amidst very strict security measures. The defendant is accused of attacking the monarchy in an interview she gave to a local newspaper at the beginning of this month, in which she said that she prefers a Republican governing system, casting doubt on the legitimacy of the monarchy which she sees as unfit to govern Morocco. Attention was focused on this incident at the international and national levels, which is believed to be the focal point of a new struggle.
She is not confrontational. She is rather steadfast. She only expressed the opinion of the Justice and Charity Organization and her own opinion.
This trial has surprised most political observers because it is not the first time that Nadia Yassin has expressed her preference for a Republican system. Furthermore, many officials and government employees have already expressed similar preferences, but none of them have been tried. This was not the case with the daughter of the spiritual leader of this Islamic organization. This comes while Morocco is going through a difficult situation, which is reflected in the deteriorating economic situation and social problems. Not to mention the recent developments concerning the Western Sahara Desert dilemma. These factors can't be ignored when trying to obtain a comprehensive understanding of what is going on in Morocco. In fact, these variables are the main motivation behind this trial, which appears to be based on legal ground, but in fact is political.
This trial is in effect trying Professor Nadia for expressing her views, opinions, and academic suggestions. The way in which the police dealt with her case clearly shows that she is being treated in an unmoral way. This is in violation of how court proceedings should be held according to criminal laws, and thus it sets a dangerous precedent. The defense team and reporters are prevented from entering the court.
It is her academic argument that a Republican system is the most suitable system for Morocco, and that has made her a target. This way, they are hoping to stop this idea and prevent it from going any further.
Observers believe that what made this case important and the center of the media and political debates is the fact that it coincided with statements released by Prince Moula Hisham, the nephew of the Moroccan king Mohammed VI. Prince Hisham said that he does not fear the arrival of Islamic movements to power, referring to the Justice and Charity Organization. He said that it is not different from any other Islamic organizations and that there is no justification to isolate it from the political process. Moula Hisham's statements were made in support of Nadia Yassin's statements, which are the reason behind this trial. All indications point out that the trial of Nadia Yassin opens a new chapter in the confrontation between the state and the Justice and Charity Organization, which has been dormant for the past 2 years since the storm that was generated by the May 16th explosions. This time, the subject of confrontation is the Moroccan regime and the king himself. This court leaves all possibilities open, including a very hot political summer. One of the 7 Russian detainees that has been released from the Guantanamo Bay in Cuba last February filed a complaint against the United States, accusing the American soldiers of abusing the detainees and desecrating the Muslim holy book of the Quran.
500 prisoners are locked up in Guantanamo Bay on terrorism charges, and the prison is even being expanded to accommodate more prisoners. Washington is still denying access to international agencies and human rights organizations to the prison, which is known for its bad reputation. The U.S. is trying very hard to improve its image, especially after the recent incidents of human rights violations in the prisons of Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay. The U.S. tried to depict Guantanamo Bay as an oasis and a 5-star hotel where prisoners are treated with respect and dignity. Parallel to this U.S. propaganda, more complaints and allegations of prisoner abuse and human rights violations have surfaced. The latest tale of abuse in Guantanamo Bay was reported by Yerad Yaktov, one of the 7 Russian prisoners that was recently released. Mr. Yaktov filed a legal complaint against the U.S. charging the American soldiers of committing heinous crimes against release him and other inmates. They were exposed to poison gas, and dogs were unleashed to maul and maim them.
As far as the desecration of the Muslim holy book of the Quran, it is a regular scenario where the Americans throw copies of the Quran in toilets.
To avoid being arrested, Yaqub fled Russia to Afghanistan, where he was imprisoned by the Taliban in Kandahar. His bad luck took another turn when he was locked up in Guantanamo Bay. There, he was an eyewitness to multiple violations of human rights at the hands of Americans who claim to be defenders and advocates of human rights.
We are going back to the situation in the Gaza Strip. From the Army's point of view, the blocking action has succeeded. The extremists remain outside, which made their work easier, but the daily routine of thousands of others was disrupted, as our reporter Shai Heskeli reports.
From the minute the army decided to block all the roads to the strip, no one has been let through. Many hundred roadblocks were erected in the south and no one passed.
I am now going to a wedding, but there is the one comes in and no one comes out rule. I have 200 guests to the wedding, but they closed all the roads and also between the settlements. I don't know if anyone can come. We still have 1 month to live a normal life here, but they will not let us live normally.
Mahsom Kisufim became the most sensitive point at the entrance to the Katif area.
Aren't you ashamed? Look me in the eye. Aren't you ashamed to evacuate the Chutula family? Do you know who the Chutulas are? They're throwing them out of their home.
All of you quiet. Stand. Don't speak.
Opposition to the disengagement remained outside, and that was a success for the army. The army will have to repeat this kind of closure many times until the disengagement. No one entered through this blockade, and the demonstrators were redirected. Some were arrested in prison.
I have a question. Why do you arrest me? What for?
The minute we are sure that the extremists are out and no new ones are coming in, we will reopen the strip.
His attitude was pretty aggressive, and even the media was left outside.
You guys calm down.
The army wants as quiet an evacuation as possible, with a minimum of dramatic pictures to accompany it.
No one will answer them.
Tonight the roads to Gush Katif will be reopened, and the extremists will start coming in again.
And Israeli soldiers have raided a hotel in a settlement in the occupied Gaza Strip to evict radical Jews. The 150 extremist Jews were barricaded inside as opponents of the Gaza withdrawal stepped up protests across Israel. Sameh Jamil has the story.
Moving to quell protests by ultra-right Jews opposed to the Gaza pullout, Israeli police commandos stormed a hotel in a Gaza settlement to dislodge radical Jews. 150 Jews were ejected from the hotel, a bastion of resistance to the mid-August withdrawal. Police scaled ladders to enter the barricaded seaside hotel after the army declared a closed military zone in Jewish settlements in Gaza to put an end to an influx of ultra-nationalists bent on scuttling the August withdrawal. The heavily armed commandos broke down room doors and gave chase through the Palm Beach hotel compound to evict the riotous squatters, including women clutching small children. They were carried or dragged, kicking and screaming, out of the complex, and some were handcuffed in a lightning operation completed without casualties. There were 4 arrests. The army said the military closure was imposed to put a stop to extremist violence that could inflame Gaza. It said Jewish radicals were responsible for the attempted lynching of a Palestinian youth stoned from close range in a clash sparked by Jewish youth's seizure of an outpost in a nearby Palestinian neighborhood of Al-Mawasi.
What has been happening in Gaza in the last few days is extremely disturbing, and we are monitoring the situation very closely. We will take action after we assess the situation closely, and we will operate when we see it fit to do so.
The hotel raid amounted to a dress rehearsal for security forces designated to carry out the evacuation, which many of the 8,500 resident settlers vowed to resist passively. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon said earlier he ordered every necessary step to prevent far-right Jews from obstructing the pullout by setting up fortified strongholds inside Gaza settlements and blocking roads in Israel.
As you know, we've unfortunately had growing acts of violence and lawlessness as we get towards the disengagement, and the army has decided as of today to make the Gaza area a closed military zone, which means that people who have no reason to be there will not be allowed to come in.
Sharon aims to evacuate all 21 Jewish settlements in Gaza and 4 of 120 in the West Bank. A disengagement U.S.-led mediators hope will foster a roadmap peace process. While opinion polls have shown most Israelis favor his plan, Sharon has been confronted with escalating protests by ultranationalists, some of whom have threatened his life. Samir Jamil, Jordan Television.
The Palestinian Authority said it handed over 2 Israeli soldiers who got lost in the West Bank to the Israelis after a search in the city of Nablus. A Palestinian security source said an Israeli vehicle had been found abandoned in the Balata refugee camp. It showed no signs of having been damaged in any fighting. As such, Palestinian security forces deployed a search unit to find the missing Israelis. A Palestinian Interior Ministry spokesman said the 2 soldiers lost their way and have been handed over to the Israeli liaison office. Earlier, a militant faction said it was holding 2 Israeli soldiers in the city, having earlier announced that it had killed them. The Israeli army said it was still investigating whether there had been a kidnapping. Former Finance Minister Fouad Siniora was designated as Lebanon's Prime Minister, charged with forming the first government since Syrian forces withdrew. Fouad Siniora, a Sunni Muslim and aide to assassinated former Prime Minister Rafiq al-Hariri, was proposed by the future bloc led by Hariri's son Saad. He remains close to the family and is the chairman of one of Hariri's banks. All but 2 lawmakers nominated Siniora, a choice President Emin Lahoud was obliged to respect, though relations between the 2 are said to be frosty. Siniora told reporters it was not time to debate or renew disputes and was extending a hand to all Lebanese and political forces to move forward with a comprehensive reform program. Elections that ended on June 19th returned an anti-Syrian majority to parliament for the first time since Lebanon's civil war. Despite joining calls demanding the withdrawal of Syrian troops after Hariri's assassination, Siniora has called for strong and friendly ties with Damascus. Syria pulled out its troops from Lebanon in April. For the second day in a row, Lebanese Hezbollah fighters and Israeli troops exchanged fire at the border area. Israeli warplanes struck at the outskirts of 2 South Lebanese border villages. The Israeli army said it had attacked Hezbollah posts. Gunfire erupted at Israel's border with Lebanon, and the Israeli military said troops clashed with Hezbollah guerrillas in the worst violence there for 6 months. Hezbollah said the Israeli army had opened fire, but that its forces had not responded. The firefight continued, and Israeli troops said they had hit 1 Hezbollah guerrilla, but there was no confirmation. Yesterday, an Israeli soldier was killed and 5 were wounded in a Hezbollah rocket and mortar attack in the occupied Sheba Farms area. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has said he would go ahead with his investigation into murder and rape in Darfur, even though Sudan planned to conduct its own trials. But Luis Moreno Ocampo of Argentina said in his first appearance before the UN Security Council that he did not think Sudanese courts would conflict with his investigation. aimed at prosecuting persons most responsible for crimes. His comments indicated he did not expect Sudan to prosecute the main perpetrators of atrocities in Darfur, which may include senior government officials or military officers. Darfur is the first case the UN Security Council has referred to the new International Criminal Court based in The Hague, Netherlands, but Sudan has said it would not extradite anyone. Instead, Khartoum announced it would hold its own trials of 160 suspects.
My office, following this analysis, I determined that there are cases that would be admissible in relation to the Darfur situation. This decision does not represent a determination on the Sudanese legal system as such, but is essentially a result of the absence of criminal proceeding related to the cases in which my office will focus.
We believe in Sudan that we should end impunity, and we believe that any people who committed atrocities should be brought to justice. We will do this work, and then we will see legally where the ICC will come.
A majority of MPs in Lebanon's parliament backed former Minister Fouad Sanura as the next Prime Minister of Lebanon, in consultations with President Emil Lahoud. But first, Israeli troops opened fire on fighters from Hezbollah in an occupied border zone, a day after an Israeli soldier was killed in clashes. Israeli sources said at least one Hezbollah fighter was possibly killed or injured when the fighters approached an Israeli army post in the Sheba Farms. Hezbollah denied there had been a gunfight or any victims. The incident occurred the day after Hezbollah bombarded an Israeli army post in Sheba Farms, killing an Israeli soldier and prompting retaliatory artillery fire and air raids. Israeli airplanes also dropped thousands of leaflets across Lebanon, calling on the government to take control of the border. Flyers warned the Lebanese that continued Hezbollah activity could bring destruction and return Lebanon to, quote, its years of horror. Kinda Ashar has a story.
Hezbollah bombarded an Israeli army post in the occupied Sheba Farms border area with Lebanon Wednesday, killing an Israeli soldier, wounding 2 others, and prompting retaliatory artillery fire and air raids. Security sources in Lebanon said the confrontations began when around 20 Katyusha rockets and mortar rounds were fired at the Ramta and Samaiya positions in the Sheba Farms. Hezbollah artillery also fired on Israeli army positions in Amfit on the Israeli-occupied Syrian Golan Heights. An Israeli military source in Jerusalem said Hezbollah carried out a coordinated mortar and small arms attack on an army post in the Sheba Farms. Army radio said one member of a Hezbollah commando that infiltrated Israeli-occupied territory had been killed. Lebanese police said Israeli artillery responded, firing some 50 rounds on hills around the towns of Karshuba and Sheba, adding that there were no immediate reports of casualties. They later said Israeli warplanes bombarded an area around Kfar Shuba, firing 2 missiles before returning and firing 2 more around Sheba. In between the 2 air raids, the Hezbollah fighters fired 4 surface-to-surface missiles on an Israeli position in Fashkul. 15 houses, the telephone exchange, and a service station were damaged in the Israeli bombardment of Sheba. 10 minutes later, Israeli warplanes reappeared, firing 2 missiles at the neighboring village of Habariya and 2 more on the Wadi Halta Valley. In a 5th Israeli strike, bombers fired 2 missiles on the road linking Sheba with villages in the Hasbaya region, further east. For more than an hour and a half after the first Hezbollah attack, Israeli field artillery pounded the outskirts of villages in the area. Israeli forces have been reinforcing fortifications along the frontier between the Sheba Farms and Lebanon, including installation of a new barbed wire barriers and surveillance cameras. In Washington, the State Department defended Israeli retaliation. Spokesman Sin McCormack told reporters Israel has a right to defend itself. The small mountainous Sheba Farms area lies at the convergence of the Israeli, Lebanese, and Syrian borders. It was occupied from Syria in 1967 and is now claimed by Lebanon with Damascus's approval. Hezbollah, a political and social movement with a military wing, was largely responsible for driving Israeli troops from southern Lebanon in 2000 after a 22-year occupation. The United Nations says Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon is complete and the Sheba Farms is Israeli-occupied Syrian land.
Lebanon's president is expected to shortly name Fouad Sanyura, a close ally of slain former Premier Rafik al-Hariri, as the country's new prime minister, making it certain he would head the first government since Syrian troops pulled out. The majority political group in parliament, MP Saad Rafik Hariri's bloc, had named Sanyura, a former minister under Hariri, as its candidate for the post following elections that wrapped up earlier this month. Today's consultations witnessed groundbreaking talks between former exiled General Michel Aoun and his former foe, President Emil Lahoud.
Constitutionally binding consultations between President Emil Lahoud and MPs in the 128-member parliament began at the Babda Presidential Palace to name a new prime minister, although an overwhelming majority of political heavyweights have backed the nomination of former finance minister Fouad Sanyura, a key reformist and ally of assassinated Prime Minister Rafik al-Hariri. Lahoud is obligated to accept the majority's choice, but the lineup of the new government must be approved by the pro-Syrian head of state, making it more difficult for the anti-Syrian bloc to ensure a cabinet dominated by its allies. The opposition has been seeking the dismissal of Lahoud on grounds he represented a joint Syrian-Lebanese security regime which they held responsible for a series of deadly assassinations. Legislative elections that ended on June 19 returned an anti-Syrian majority to parliament for the first time since the 1975 to 1990 civil war. Syria pulled out in April under Lebanese and international pressure after popular Prime Minister Rafik Hariri's assassination. Parliament re-elected Nabih Berri as Speaker on Tuesday after the pro-Syrian veteran lawmaker and leader of an influential political movement pledged reform. Lebanon's sectarian system divides top government posts among its main religious communities. The country's president is always a Maronite Christian, the prime minister is a Sunni Muslim, and the Speaker of Parliament is a Shia. MP Saad Rafik Hariri's bloc in Parliament, the largest, representing 37 MPs at a meeting last night, decided to name former Minister Sanyura for the post of Premier, to continue the reform and development march of the assassinated Prime Minister. The bloc said it named Sanyura to, quote, put a stop to the security regime and restore a democratic system which will establish stability and confidence in the country and face the challenges of the public debt. Sanyura is also committed to assisting a United Nations probe that is investigating the February 14th bombing that killed the late premier. Hariri's legislative bloc reiterated calls on all political factions to join ranks, especially groups that took part in the March 14 unity and sovereignty rallies in downtown Beirut. It urged them to participate in the new government and render it a national action cabinet. Head of the future bloc, MP Hariri, has been making headway in thawing ties with MP General Michel Aoun, apparently ending electoral tensions and paving the way for Aoun's support and participation in the new government. Aoun said his Free Patriotic movement will join the cabinet under a clear reform program. The new cabinet has major challenges to face both domestically, manifested in a nearly $40 billion public debt, and on the international level due to calls by the UN to disarm Hezbollah and Palestinian groups here.
Meanwhile, the U.S. issued an unusual reminder about the $5 million still offered for information on 3 men who hijacked an American passenger jet 20 years ago, killing a Navy SEAL. The U.S. Embassy in Beirut said the 3 are still believed to be in Lebanon or Syria. Both Lebanon and Syria have denied that. TWA Flight 847 was hijacked in 1985 on a flight from Athens to Rome. And during a 17-day standoff at Beirut's airport, gunmen killed a U.S. Navy diver.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.